Thank you. So now I get to add B-sides to that list, so yay. So this is the No BS SOC. For some reason, people seem to like the sort of edgy, kind of push the limits, slightly rude titles. I have a talk at RSA in about a month that is called You're Doing It Wrong, about security anti-patterns. And they took that one. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see the pattern here. I have to get a little bit more rude. So here we go. Let's have some fun. So I'll start out with a little bit of who is this dude. You heard a little bit in the intro. Thank you. And where does this content come from? Just to kind of give you some context of where I pulled this from, which doesn't sound good when I go to the next line of where does the SOC BS come from. So we'll talk about that and sort of some of the challenging information, confusing information, sort of what are the sources of that and why do you see that? And then get into the anti-patterns we see. So these are the common mistakes we see that security operations folks are making, oftentimes without knowing it. One of the things that we highlight very strongly in that RSA talk is be kind to yourself and to others. This is not a place where there was a magic book that everybody should have read in 9th grade that explained how to do security, right? Anybody get that book? Nobody got that book. We are all figuring this out as we go. It's hard, it's complex, it's constantly changing. So be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves. It is very, very hard. So these anti-patterns are there to help you understand the common mistakes. It's part of that, we saw the ode to cybersecurity before we started. It's part of this really being a love letter in terms of, hey, this is what we are doing wrong. And then what does good look like? Let's flip it to the solution side, talk about the challenges that we face, being very honest and direct about those, but kind. And then how is AI changing SecOps, because everybody asks it, so I always put it in my decks. And then the story of a SOC, and I will do my very best not to actually sing that song. I even came up with alternate parody lyrics. I'm going to stop myself right now. And then a call to action to stay focused on what matters. And for reference, because I will be talking, the Microsoft CDOC, or Security Operations Center, is the primary source for a lot of this information. It's a very highly mature organization. There have been some recent incidents against Microsoft. Because of the way regulations are written and being enforced today, I cannot tell you anything, even if I knew it, and I'm not saying I do or don't, that is not already public, because we have to do that fairly with all investors. So just so you know, I cannot answer questions on that, because there's no point. You can just go read the stuff yourself. So just as a heads up on that. So let's get started. I do Microsoft work. I do open standards work for all to read. That is completely vendor neutral, abstract. The zero trust work that we do at the open group is focused on defining what good looks like for security, sort of that missing book that we wish we had in 9th grade kind of thing I mentioned earlier, starting with capabilities. Everybody in business knows that you have to be able to take money and you have to build a product, you have to ship a product. They define those capabilities and it changes over time. Do you ship it by sea, by land, et cetera? Do you manufacture it here? Do you outsource it? Those capabilities remain the same even if how you do it is different. Security needs the same thing, and so that's really what we're focusing on very heavily is how do you, what are those capabilities which are defined in the reference model? You know, what are the rules for doing zero trust and good security well, the zero trust commandments, and then what are the architecture building blocks, et cetera, that map to? And so that's the work that we're doing right now. So that's what I do there. And then because I was really kind of bored and I needed something else to do, I decided to go ahead and write a playbook, which became a playbook series. And so when you take the fact that there's about 65 or 70 roles in security, and then you multiply that by, we found out it takes about a chapter, not a section, to describe each one, it got long. And we weren't going to give you a 7,000-page book. So it's a series, the first one's out. So those are the things that I draw from those different perspectives on that very role-based, the capability-based, and technology architecture-based views. And for those that haven't seen it, Mark's List, I post all the public stuff that I do as well as other good stuff I refer to people all the time. So, security industry has a few buzzwords. Any of these sound familiar? And Microsoft, of course, contributes there in the top left corner with our own terminology, which hopefully will stay stable. I think it will, and we won't have to do any more product name changes. I think we're in a sustainable system. I'm hoping we actually sustain it. I am not in marketing, so I can't make a guarantee. But ultimately, a lot of this material is drawn from the Security Adoption Framework, or SAF, which one of the missions is to put all this in context and organize it and make it make sense. So that is some of the Microsoft work that I do, is that Security Adoption Framework. And this is something that is actually deliverable through Microsoft Unified. You all know what that is, you know, kind of replaced Microsoft Premier. That's the organization I work in at Microsoft. We built end-to-end strategy, end-to-end technical architecture, and we're in the process of building all of the initiatives and how to modernize them, the plans, the architectures, everything to get people to modernize in a very regular, measurable way. And the material today is drawn from the Security Operations, or SOC one. We have both a short and long version of that, a couple hours and a couple days, depending on how deep folks want to go in. And then we're working on building that for the rest of them. We have most of the short stuff done, and we're working on the long stuff after that. So that's the context of where these slides come from. Let's talk about the BS. So do a lot of research, spend a lot of time paying attention to what's going out in industry, what are the recommendations, et cetera, because good ideas can come from anywhere. The thing that we see in most of the guidance is it falls into one of these 4 buckets. Sometimes it's too high level. It's great, it's accurate, it's correct, but it's not actionable. You can't do anything with it. It's a high level principle. Sometimes it's too low level. This is exactly what this particular nation state did, and here's the IOCs, the hashes, the IPs, the this, that, the behaviors. But okay, how does that fit into an overall security operations program? Sometimes we see vendor biased. I don't think I have to explain that one. And sometimes we really see bovine secretions. Sorry, that's the BS thing. Outdated or just plain wrong. And so we see a mix of that. Oftentimes in there, though, and this is sort of the mixed bag, is there are gems in there. There are nuggets of wisdom and beautiful insights that people have that just get caught up in that broken context. And so we do our best to pull all that together. Now, why do we end up with this? 2 things we tend to see. Silver bullet thinking. How many folks ever heard a vendor say, if you do this, it will stop these attacks? Okay. How many of you have seen vendors that are smart enough to not say that exactly, but imply it very strongly? Also seeing hands. What we see, this thing has really gone underground. So the silver bullet thinking hasn't gone away, but we do see a lot of sort of implicitly believing in absolute claims. Obviously, most people can spot the BS on an obvious one, but it's starting to get into the things where, hey, I'm not going to do that because it won't block all the attacks. Well, you're sitting at 0% effectiveness. Why are you complaining about 80%? So we do see this sneak into people's thinking, and so it's something you have to keep an eye on. RSA talk goes deeper into that, but and lack of life cycle thinking we also see. One and done. We're going to solve it once. We put it in the script and we never have to look at it again. And this is sort of the lack of governance and those things. So it does rear its head in a couple places. Other one that's very, very prevalent in security operations is technology-centric thinking. Because these attacks happen on the technical environment, we assume that we need to block them technically. Attacks are conducted by people. People who have a goal and a plan and a way to profit from it, whether it's a raise from their boss or making money directly as sort of a solo contractor. Our adversaries have a plan. The question is, do you? And that's the real question we have to answer here. And so we've got to look beyond the technology and look at the people, understand there's burnout, understand people need to collaborate across teams for it to work, understand that people need training. If all you've ever learned is network and IP addresses and subnets and all that stuff, and the attacker is using pass the hash or some other identity attack, that experience and knowledge isn't going to carry you to where you need to go. So we have to remember that this is a people-centric thing, and you'll see that show up in all the diagrams that we're going to be seeing. Of course, you can't solve a people process problem with tools. If you have a problem where someone calls up and says, hey, I'm the CFO, and they have this nice fake, AI-generated voice, and I need you to approve this thing, is there a technology solution to that problem? It's a people and process problem that you need to go ahead and have an out-of-band check and all these things. You need a process solution for things like business email compromise and executive whaling. You cannot expect tools to solve every problem. They will help. They automate processes. They make it so that they can guide people with less training to do a task in a simpler way, but they don't magically solve problems. These are people and process problems that technology automates. And of course, money. Money accelerates both of these factors, which accelerates all of the pile. Make sense? All right. Let's move on, start talking solution side. What is the mission of security operation? Very simply, it's about reducing risk. What is risk? Risk is bad things happening and doing your best to keep them from happening or managing it well if and when they do happen. The same is true of hurricanes, financial crises, everything. All the bad stuff is a risk discipline. Security is sometimes an enabler, and in the mindset of having an enablement, hey, how do I help the business succeed, is very important. But at the end of the day, it's our job to keep the bad stuff from happening. And so the way we do that in security operations is right of bang. The bad thing has already happened. Even threat hunting, which is a proactive version of security operations, is all about finding a bad thing that already happened that we missed. So everything in security operations is right of bang. And by the way, there is a missing sister or cousin or brother, whatever you want to call it, operational function left of bang, before things happen, called posture management. Oftentimes it's just vuln management, it's governance teams. Some people are stepping in, but there is a need for a corresponding operational function on the left side. If your SOC is doing vuln management, they're doing two different operational functions at once. Two very different focuses, two very different dynamics, working with some of the same teams, but in a very different way to make sure patches and configurations and everything are right, versus dealing with an active adversary. Two very different skill sets. Make sense? So the mission on the right of bang side is time. If I happen to know my adversaries, if I happen to have great tracking across the 10 or 12 or 30 adversaries that could be targeting our organization, then I can absolutely get more specific and more detailed with my SOC goals. If I don't know that, if I don't have that level of threat intelligence, if that's 2, 5, 10, 20 years in my organization's future, what I can focus on is time. In 2.5 minutes, an adversary can do a lot less damage than 2.5 hours, 2.5 days, weeks, 2.5 months, or even 2.5 years that they sometimes get. Do not give them time to operate, time to hide, time to get to their objectives, time to burrow, time to resell it to somebody else. Burn their time down. Find them, kick them out. Now, that sounds like speed is the thing, right? Accuracy, impact, and speed. You ever seen a kid try to do something fast that doesn't quite know what they're doing? The outcome isn't always great if it's just about speed. You want to make sure you got accuracy, impact, and speed. You're actually aiming at the right thing, you're doing it quickly, and you're doing it effectively. Make sense? So that is the mission. Dwell time, MTTR. So let's go to the metrics. I'll bring them all up. The metrics, mean time to remediate. That's the important R. That is the adversary no longer has access. The clock starts ticking as soon as they get access to your assets, and of course they will grow it. And the clock stops when they no longer have access. That is the time period that is most important. There are a lot of other metrics, a lot of other things that are interesting and useful that help tell you that you're doing something healthy in a good way, but the amount of time they have access to your assets is something you can talk to and explain to a business leader, and they will understand. Because they understand, hey, we have a thief in the building. We're going to try and knock him out in as few minutes as possible, as few seconds as possible. CEO can get that. And you don't have to explain all the rest of the stuff. Hey, this is complicated stuff we do. If you're interested, I'll tell you more. But you can communicate that up, and it relates to them, and it makes sense, and it actually reduces risk. Make sense? One of the other key measurements is MTTA, mean time to acknowledge. When does an analyst start working on it? How long has the little blinky light been blinking before someone does work? Because that can tell you you're overstaffed, you're generating a lot of false positives. It can tell you a lot of different things. It depends on your SOC and what's broken. But the longer that thing is sitting there blinking, the more time the adversary has to play. Because no one's even trying to chase them. Make sense? So these tend to be the two most important ones. We'll talk about more in just a moment. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You have to have a strong culture that has these elements. Mission aligned. Generally, people don't go and look at a bunch of technical alerts unless they give a shit. Sorry. Unless they care. So that one's pretty much almost automatic in most security operations roles. It is not something people do for the fun of it or because it's an easy job. Generally, they have a caring for keeping the organization safe. That's almost a given in security. But the important ones are continuous learning. What you know today is not going to be enough for tomorrow. You have to be continuously learning, whether it's identity, network, learning about attacks, learning about better ways to do things. That is critical. And then teamwork. Collaboration matters. If the SOC is trying to be the solo hero, or there is a person in your security operations that is trying to be the hero and doesn't share what they know and doesn't talk about how they do it and doesn't want to write it down for someone else to do it, that person is poison. You have to be sharing and collaborating, not only within security operations, because this is literally changing by the day, by the minute. The adversaries, if they do the same thing that they did yesterday and cheap and easy blockers stop them, they're not going to be good adversaries and they're going to go find a different living. They have to change. They have to find a way around. That is the only way for the adversaries to succeed. And so there is always continuous changes. You have to learn and you have to work together as a team and share what you know with your teammates and learn from them. That is the only way this works. And that is not restricted to the SOC or security operations. That is across to IT and architects and engineers. Do you want to investigate the same exact incident as yesterday because they didn't block it? Anyone ever complain that you're investigating the same incident as yesterday because nobody blocked it? Yeah, I'm seeing some hands. Okay, got some honesty there. Got to communicate with those folks and help them understand, listen, we're seeing this. This is a report. This is what we did. This is our investigation. Share with them. Buy them pizza. Have the managers buy them pizzas, even better. But go ahead and work with them and help them understand informally, and then later you can formalize it as a threat intelligence discipline. Threat intelligence is not just data. It is a discipline of sharing information. Make sense? All right. So, what matters for success? As we said, it's about the time. Minutes matter. That is the overriding thing. But you cannot do that in isolation. People are the ones who do it and express their human judgment. This is a people-centric thing. This is red versus blue. This is spy versus spy. This is human mind versus human mind. They're no longer fighting with their fists and their bodies or their spears or their tanks or their planes. They're fighting in a technical environment to defeat each other. This is the conflict. This is just conflict management. You know, a board game is also a domain of human conflict. So the people matter the most. But they need to be doing it in a process, because if the people don't write down what they do so they can learn and get better at it the next day, they're going to quickly find themselves losing. Technology matters because it automates those processes, enables those things, and allows you to see data and insights that you wouldn't otherwise see, accelerating those processes, taking the annoying, burnout manual ones off of your plate. And intelligence matters, and we're not talking about IQ here. We're talking about data and context on what are the adversaries doing, what have we seen and learned from our attacks, and what have others seen and learned from around the world and our peers and our industry competitors, et cetera. How are we bringing that into this? And as I said before, teamwork matters, because none of us is as smart as all of us, and that is extremely true in the SOC, where we simply do not have time to keep up. We have to be learning from each other, leaning on each other. And the Zero Trust Playbook, as we're going through it, one of the things I'm driving for is it doesn't matter that one person can't possibly know an entire technical estate of containers and malware and this, that, and the other. You have to have that in aggregate in your team. So somebody knows containers, somebody knows the server, somebody knows Linux, somebody knows Windows, somebody knows endpoint, somebody knows identity, somebody knows email, and work as a team on it, because that's the only way you're going to keep up with the massively complex technical estates we have. Make sense? All right. So let's have a little fun with anti-patterns, shall we? So we see some of these same anti-patterns playing out over and over, and this is almost, and that song is coming out again, the story of a SOC. I'll probably end up singing it by the end. A couple of common mistakes that we see over and over again. We all know that we need data. We need visibility to be able to see the attackers, right? If we're blind, we don't see the attackers because we don't have that data coming in. But oftentimes we stop at the first stage, which is we need the data. And it's like, great, so you have all of the data and you have all of this information. What detections have you built off of it, and how high of a quality are they? Well, we have the data. That doesn't mean you actually know that the attacker's in there. You haven't found those 12 or 15 or 200 events out of the 10 million that are actually relevant, and brought that to someone's attention, started an investigation, and then kicked them out. We see a lot of this. And going back to money, are SIM vendors paid on how much risk you have, or are SIM vendors paid on how much data you're storing? You think their salespeople are going to worry about it if you're storing all the data, or they're going to move on to the next customer?
They're going to buy their BMW.
They buy their BMW. That's a pretty good choice, yeah. But ultimately, you have to think about this in an outcome-centric way. We also see a lot of security folks, nothing wrong with this, started as networking folks. What was some of the first security technology we saw? Firewalls. And what team did they assign it to when there wasn't a security team yet? The networking team. And where did they add the IDS, IPS when those came out? Networking, and probably the DLPs as well. And they might have fought it over if they actually have a data team, right? But that's the kind of stuff that happens. We have that history, right? And that history influenced the culture of security. And we have a lot of folks with those deep skills. The attackers have gone far beyond scan and exploit over the network. They have gotten deep into endpoints. They've gotten deep into identity, applications. You see some of the nation state stuff today, it's all cloud-based stuff based on identities. They're very sophisticated. They've learned the ins and outs of those systems. We have to get past that original foundation. It's necessary to understand networking, but not sufficient to do what we do today. So network is the only source of truth is a common anti-pattern. Not invented here. We didn't have great tools. Again, we went from collections, not detection. We had all this stuff here. And how do we get something out of it? Well, we had to write our own queries. We had to do our own stuff. And when you create this thing and you spend hours and days and months and years of your career doing it, do you like it or hate it? Usually both. But you have this sort of, hey, we did all this stuff. And then all of a sudden there's a market for it, and vendors are putting out good tools and detections, and we see a lot of resistance to using an off-the-shelf thing because it can't be as good as this custom thing that we created. We see a little bit of obsession on the shiny object syndrome of going after the cool, sexy, top-end stuff without doing hygiene, which is just common across security. Usually after the first breach, people finally get the budget they've been asking for. They get the EDR, the XDR, the SIM, whatever tool that they wanted, and they try to solve every problem with that one tool that they got budgeted for, right? Sound familiar? And so you have this one tool to rule them all, one ring to rule them all kind of thing going on. That was my best attempt at IFSAR in there. And then oftentimes, following breaches sometimes, or more budget comes along, you get a whole bunch of tools, and you end up with a toolapalooza. The one nut I haven't cracked, the one problem I haven't been able to solve is when people are sort of getting in this point where they finally get the budget for all this, and they think that they can solve it by throwing even more awesome, cool tools at it that aren't built to work with each other, that listen, you really want tools that work together. Yeah, that's the one thing I haven't solved because everybody wants all the cool tools and the far right of the magic quadrant, the far right of the Forrester wave, all that. And like, listen, it kind of sucks to have to make all these things work together. Getting people to imagine that scenario when they've ever had tools, I still haven't solved that. I have not been able to get people to time travel into that. Like this, it really hurts. But anyway, these are the things that we usually see go wrong. All of these are symptomatic of a technical-centric, bottom-up approach that I mentioned earlier. The solution for this, start at the top. What is our mission? What are the metrics? What are we trying to achieve? What teams and functions and specialties and expertise do I need? What are the processes that those teams need to work together? Then you get to the tools and technology and architecture to support and enable those, and then to the training and skills and enablement to make sure people are successful on those processes and tools to achieve the mission. And then automation and data, constantly automating stuff and making things better and managing the data that you have to make sure that those aren't getting in your way. Top down. Make sense? So here are the metrics. These are directly from Microsoft internal security operations team. This is the, we're in the process of merging a bunch of them together, but this is from the ones that look most like our customers. This is our essentially our IT environment, that particular security operations department. MTTR, MTTA are top of it. And by the way, this is also what we recommend to our customers. So it's both a case study and a recommendation. We haven't seen any reason not to use this at most organizations. Caseloads, we want to keep an eye on how much volume is actually flowing through, so we know what each team is doing, and specifically we want to understand how many of those are being automated as well. So we want to understand how well our automation is working. There's always this interesting tension of, you want to have a human kind of double check the automation, but you also don't want to have them burn down. So there's always this interesting tension of your, especially your triage, your tier 1 folks, on how much that you want them to touch those automated cases versus not. So there's no magic solution there that we found so far. Detection fidelity, this one's super important if you are doing custom detections. If you're just taking them off the XDRs and what's recommended and working the top of the stack down like a Defender XDR would provide for you, you don't have to worry about this as much, but if you're doing custom detections either in your XDR, in your SIM, or some other detection, you want to make sure that you're not putting a bunch of false positives in front of people that are burning them down. That's a very bad thing, because you disconnect them from the mission, you burn out the few people that you can get, and you don't actually reduce risk. You're just basically wasting time and, quite frankly, people, which is not a good thing at all. If you do have your own custom tools, watching the uptime is important, and then keeping an eye on how are we resolving it. So we understand how many true positives, how many false positives we're dealing with in aggregate. And this is actually the ratio and proportion from that Microsoft SOC. We actually end up with a lot of benign positives. The technical detection was correct, but it wasn't actually malicious. We're a security company. We have a lot of salespeople. We have a lot of field support people. We have a lot of researchers. And sometimes they click on Mimikatz on the wrong machine. Stuff happens. So we end up having a lot of these benign positives, probably more than most organizations do. But we do see that the most. Then we see true positives, false positives, and a whole bunch of duplicates merged and all those kind of things kind of bring up the rear.
Can I ask you something real quick?
Yes?
This is all predicated on the instrumentation being correct and that the system's properly deployed and all the sources are reporting in properly. How do you validate that?
So the question was, the comment was, this is all predicated on all of the information and data being correct and the systems being correct and accurate. And that is an absolute correct statement. In terms of how do you measure whether the quality is good or not?
That all sources are reporting in, that you're getting all the log sources.
Yes.
That you're supposed to.
Yeah, that's so that all the log sources are being reporting in, et cetera. Yes, there is a governance element to it in addition to this. This is more of the outcome and the risk management elements. So you are absolutely correct on that. Thank you. Good point. And of course, you always want to watch trends. What are the adversaries doing? Where are the investments that we're doing? Are they having an effect? We put this in May. Is it lowering or increasing anything? Are we seeing, because SecOps, the other thing is you see this red box shows up anytime there's metrics there. Very, very important thing about metrics. SecOps is not in control of its destiny. It is a response force. It deals with whatever the adversaries are throwing at us this day. There may be more in a given month. There may be less in a given month. There may be better tooling that just the adversaries got to. For example, in 2008 to 10 timeframe, we saw the spike that has led to this room being filled with cybersecurity folks today, because what used to be a very small number of nation states with a big R&D budget that could do credential theft and pass the hash became an open source, an openly downloadable tool, then later open source Mimikatz, that allows anyone to do it. And we saw second and third tier nation states and criminals eventually pick it up with the ransomware gangs. And so what's happening in the world is affected, and what the SOC sees is affected by what's happening in the world. So it's really important not to punish people if the metrics go up or down, because we control some of it, but we not control all of it. We have to recognize that we are just dealing with whatever the world is throwing at us. So, kind of along that line of the history thing, you do have to ruthlessly prioritize. There's a little bit of history. I should have just gone forward to the next slide. Sorry about that. In the old days, sort of pre-2008, you had commodity attacks that everybody kind of got used to and AV mostly handled. And then you had antivirus, anti-malware. And then advanced attacks that were the domain of a very few nation states that were well-funded. As those tools and others started to become open source and more widely available to attackers, we started to see more and more advanced attacks coming from more and more countries, more and more attack groups. And so we did see that bump up in priority for more organizations. And then the ransomware thing came in two different waves. One was the first basic one at a time, one endpoint at a time almost nuisance ransomware that we were able to sort of get under control fairly quickly. Very consumer-oriented, but then shifted to the enterprise because they realized there was money there. The big shift was after the NotPetya or Petya, depending on how you want to name it, destructive operation by a nation state that masqueraded as a mass ransomware attack shortly after the WannaCrypt. That sort of gave rise, and I think probably inspired the ransomware groups to start using those credential theft techniques in their attacks and using human operators as opposed to a just automated script and run and see what comes back. And that changed the game, and that's where we got into big game ransomware, where they started targeting organizations and using some of those pass the hash, pass the ticket, et cetera, attacks that allowed them to take an entire enterprise down. And most SOCs should be focusing on ransomware and extortion as their top priority because of that, if they aren't already. And then there was an interesting thing that happened on the way to the play, which is commodity gangs realized they could resell the access they had to any given organization to those ransomware gangs. Commodity gangs don't want to take the huge law enforcement risks. They're just trying to stay under the radar. So they get 10 grand, 25 grand, whatever it is, to sell access to any given company. It varies. It's very much an online market, and the prices go up and down. And then the ransomware gangs try to turn those tens of thousands into millions. And so you saw this collaboration and cooperation among the attackers, that all the stuff that you could ignore for the entire history of cybersecurity as low grade, all of a sudden, botnets and whatnot, became a very urgent priority, oftentimes more important than the nation states. Make sense? So you got to keep in mind the world changes on you. So, people. There's an old Jimmy Buffett quote, relationships. We all want them. We all got them. What do we do with them? Sorry. I was just in Florida. It's a Jimmy Buffett thing. Anyway, so the passion that people have, especially in security operations, to go and chase the bad guys in real time, can also be the very thing that causes us to burn out. And we have to watch this very carefully, and it doesn't just affect analysts, it affects managers as well. We have to take care of ourselves, we have to take care of our people, because the last thing we want is a little gray pile of ash instead of an actual full person. That is not doing anybody any favors. That person, the company, anybody. It's not a good thing that let people burn out. Why do people burn out? A couple different things. This is basically a psychology slide with a couple of cybersecurity words thrown on it, just so you know. This is general burnout. But their mission and what they connect to, which is protecting the organization, if taken too far, can lead to exhaustion and can also be not recognized, and which leads to the burnout and the lack of connection to the mission that originally started it. You've got to make sure people rest, even if they don't want to, that they are learning, they're doing self-care, send them to conferences, whatever. Make sure that people have time to breathe and think. And document and celebrate the wins. Make sure they get recognition for the hard work they put in. Not every attack you're going to get a W. Sometimes you get an L, right? And you got to recognize that. You got to support people whether they win or not, that they're putting that effort in, and make sure you're rewarding that learning and all those other kind of good things that they're doing. Doing other people's jobs sucks. Anyone like doing other people's jobs and not getting paid or recognized for it? I don't see any hands. Odd. You have to make sure that the SOC isn't doing a whole bunch of jobs. Like, implementing, maintaining tools when you're already a security analyst, that's rough. Writing up a report, analyzing your architecture, managing and coordinating incidents, that's different than investigating them. Researching the attacks and other questions. Like, as you have time and resources to be able to do it, let people specialize in these things so the analysts can do what they are best at. And one that really, really sucks is vulnerability management, because that's a very different discipline. It's a very IT operations oriented and infrastructure operations oriented thing. And that is the posture management thing that a lot of us have been missing, but the SOC gets slapped with that because, hey, you're operational, so you do this. So that's one of the big mistakes we see. Wasting effort on false positives and repetitive tasks is also a source of burnout. This is where vendors can and should be trying to help you with technology, getting rid of some of those low-quality detections, which can require hunting. We'll talk about that in the story of a SOC. Automated advanced analytics helps, and then integrating threat intelligence so you don't have to do manual copy paste and looking this up to see if this is well known. All of those things help. That's where technology does help. Not much technology in the rest of this though. And even in this space, you can't do everything. You have to prioritize. What are the cleanest alerts? What are the most urgent alerts? What are the assets that we have to worry about the most? Spend your time on that, and don't make people expect that they're going to get through 1,000 alerts in a queue in a day. That is not the right way to do it. You have to prioritize. Nobody want to do that to themselves. Why would you do it to someone else? Make sense? So, AI. Can't have a talk about anything without AI nowadays, right? So, role of artificial intelligence, already being used, been being used. Y'all heard of machine learning? Mathematical probability algorithms being applied to a lot of data. One of two ways. It's either I have an expert, I had them look at a sample data set, and it told the machine what to do, it tagged it, and then we run it over a whole bunch of data sets and data streams from there on out. That is supervised machine learning. Other way of doing it is, here's a raw data set, we don't have anything to do with it, but let's throw an ML algorithm over it, see what it finds for clusters and patterns and those kind of things, and then give it to an expert to look at and see if those are interesting or if they're just a coincidence. Make sense? That's what ML is. That's what it's been doing for a long time. It's been baked into XDR as kind of the foundation of some of the innovations in that space, and it's being applied to SIM and some others now. So AI, that form of it, has already been in use for a long time, and it is very, very, very useful. Think of it as the opposite of that old, really terrible but good sounding advice. Oh, you just need to look at the logs. Anyone ever get that advice? Anyone like the person that gave them that advice? Didn't think so. So this is helping get us out of that pain, but still get the insight and the value that was desired. So, dive into this in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but it changes how security operations works and learns. It changes the interface, the way that people interact with technology. And I'll zoom into that slide in just a moment. It fundamentally changes that and makes it more natural language. We're still in the V1s of it, but the ability for that to generally understand our intent and then be able to do something about that is very, very powerful. It's very dangerous, but it's also very powerful on the good side. Like any tool, you know, blades, nuclear weapons, et cetera. Not nuclear weapons, nuclear power, which could be nuclear weapons or, you know, sorry, that went wrong. But anyway, it's a double-edged sword. We'll stop there and shut up. All right. And then we'll talk about the scenarios in security operations where we are seeing value as Microsoft and that we're investing in, because these are the ones that are the most ready first. There's a lot of things you can do. We've done a lot of learning with our Security Copilot through the early access program and some other things that has given us a lot of insights into what it is really good at and what is going to take a little bit longer. And this is what we found it is really good at first. And so we'll talk about those in just a moment. So, interfaces. I'm not going to do the Jimmy Buffett joke again. Anyone here in the era of punch cards? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. I'm not the oldest person in the room, clearly. So I never did punch cards. I started back at an IBM PC, was my first computer. In the early days, the only way you could make a computer do anything useful was you had to program it, you know, through punch cards and all that. And it's gotten better over time, right? You got from direct binary into assembly, into compilers, and then into kind of the, not the object-oriented language, what's the, like the Java and all that, the easier to write languages, whatever those are. But programming started, and that was absolutely speaking the computer's language. And then we progressively made it a little bit easier, but at the end of the day, you're telling the computer exactly what to do in its language. We kind of got tired of writing programs to do the same thing over and over again, so we created a bunch of commands that could do the same thing over and over again consistently. Hence, the command prompt was born. DOS, the command shells in Linux, Unix predecessors, et cetera, and that was a great way of repeating it. But then we got kind of tired of having to memorize all the flipping commands, and there was a lot of people that couldn't memorize all the commands. And so we got, hey, why don't we have them click on those commands, and we now have a GUI that explains stuff and that tells you the options that you can do to click. And of course, each of these then progressed and got better over time. And then there's been this dream for a very long time. I know Bill Gates was promoting in the 90s, it probably predates that, of natural language interface where the human language works and the computer understands what we're doing. And we've had chatbots for a while. We've had like the Siris and all that kind of stuff. But Siri honestly feels like DOS, but verbally, to be honest with you, because if you don't say it exactly the right way, it's like, nope, command not found. Or I'm sorry, I didn't understand that or something. But we've had this dream for a long time, and this is starting to become real because we can now speak to it in our language, and it will generally be able to figure out our intent. Maybe not perfectly, but it's able to start doing that in a way that we have not experienced before. And so that is one of the interesting things about this that is transforming a lot of things, including security operations. And the trend that we see over this time is that what it takes and the amount of skills you have to have and learn and train and go to school for is getting smaller and smaller to be able to be effective. And then what you can do with it, and again, it takes time to develop these things and build the apps and all that kind of stuff, allows much more to be done without having to go through and do as much work. Make sense? And so that's kind of the progression we're on. It is by no means magic, but it is moving us to the right on that curve. So the scenarios that Microsoft is focusing on, because they work, and they work well, not perfectly, but well, is incident response, kind of guiding people along that journey. And so that's one of the priority, these are the 4 priority scenarios for Copilot for security. Used to be called Security Copilot, now it's Copilot for security. Thank you, marketing. Impact analysis, which is what did this incident result in, so that we can then do business analysis and all the other things and actually produce a report that our business leaders can understand. And then a technical incident summarization, so we can understand what happened and we can bring someone on and have them help out with it, supplement it, take over the case, et cetera. And send a report to the boss and get them off my back so I can get back to the incident. And then reverse engineering of scripts, we found it's really good because it understands language as well, and scripting is indeed a language, right? It's a logical flow. So those are the scenarios that we found AI works well for. So let's talk about capabilities, and then I'll do the story of a SOC, and then I think that's it. So very, very, very people-centric as I mentioned. It's very mission-oriented and aligned. And everything started with a SIM in most cases, grabbing a whole bunch of data and then hopefully turning it into a detection, but not always. XDR was a game changer. And this has changed how we think about SOC, how I would build a SOC from scratch today if I did today, which is instead of requiring you to do something with the data, it comes with vendor-built, vendor-maintained, oftentimes cloud-hosted detections. And all you have to do is learn what to do with those detections. You don't have to figure out all the detection stuff, you just figure out what to do with them because they're handed to you on a silver platter. Now you can still get advanced, you can go into hunting and use some other stuff for that, but these things know, and the thing is they're better than the classic SIM approach because endpoint, for example, here, when you talk about endpoint logs, you're stuck with whatever that endpoint and the apps on it decided to share with you as an event they wanted to write. When you put an agent or some other sensor on there that looks at memory, looks at process trees, and looks at those activities as well, all of a sudden you now can look and see things that could not be seen just by looking at the logs, regardless of how good you are at KQL or Splunk query language. That asset-specific focus plus somebody else doing it for you on the alerts and the response procedures and automations often completely changes what you would do in a SOC. I would never start a SOC with a SIM today. I would do a SIM last. I would do a SIM after I put XDR out there on the things I cared about most. Endpoint, identity, email. That is the traversal pass of the attackers today. Network is interesting, but we haven't had in the Microsoft SOC that I was mentioning earlier, we haven't had a primary detection from a network thing, from a network data since like 2016 or 17, I think. It's been a long time. We still use that. It helps us with the investigation, it helps us with threat hunting. But the initial detection of an adversary almost always comes from endpoint, email, and identity, and then there's some app-specific stuff rounding it out as well. Automation is key. Last thing you want people to do is repeated the same thing over and over and over again. SOAR is fantastic. The XDR stuff that has SOAR built in is awesome, and then you want to have custom SOAR to do your own scenarios, connect your tools, and orchestrate them together. Threat intelligence, that context of have we seen this before, that helps you prioritize, deprioritize it, link and correlate that this is a part of that attacker that we learned about last month, etc. Having that context is critical. It's not magic, but it is critically important. And then you don't have to do it alone. You can bring in experts and other folks to do it and outsource it as well. So that's that one. And then and then the generative AI, as I mentioned, decided to put this as an extension of the human because that's really where it fits. There's a few new capabilities like the script analysis that it adds, but that's not significant enough compared to a new analyst being able to ask, what should I do next? You know, can you look at this? That allows people in the first couple of years of their career to be a lot more productive than they would be otherwise. Very, very powerful for bringing people up. It does also help the experts, but it's very, very powerful for folks that are junior and early in career. And then just because I could, I used a morph transition to here's Microsoft's technology that does that. This is public as part of the MCRA, so you're welcome to grab the actual original slide. You're welcome to take a picture. But that one is part of the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, which is a free download and includes all the slide notes for how it builds and all that. It's probably about a page and a half, 2 pages of notes, which is the hardest part of getting those new ones out, by the way. Doing the slides isn't as hard as actually writing all the notes and making sure they're aligned. So let's talk skills and careers. Like as you build a SOC, we'll do this through the lens of the personnel first, and then we'll do it through the sort of stages of the team. Generally, the first thing that happens is a couple people that are looking part-time and then maybe later full-time at the alerts that are coming in. Sometimes, often, penetration testing as an outsourced function, usually also at the same time. As volume grows, organization grows, team grows, you start splitting, hey, I'm going to have some folks working on the front line and doing the more repetitive tasks and the higher volume stuff, and then some stuff that are going to do more of the high complexity, deeper investigations that are likely a human attack operator. So that's the first natural split that we see. Sometimes, you know, outsourcing and getting digital forensics and reverse engineering and whatnot from other sources or tools or what have you. And then we see sort of the tier 3, as it were, being built. And by the way, we use the names of these, not the numbers, because we're not stack ranking people. We are absolutely not stack ranking people. What we are doing is recognizing that there are different skill sets there. In fact, when we do a large investigation at Microsoft, there's a lot of occasions where these guys are really great at email and the things that they cover all the time. There's no sense in having these folks waste their time on something they don't do very often. So we often have those folks task out and do some of the email cleanup and the endpoint cleanup while these other folks focus on the servers, containers, and other elements of the attack. And so we do see a lot of that teamwork going on there. So it's not, you know, a 1, 2, and a 3 and you graduate up and you never touch that stuff again. That is not the way to do this. You want to be looking at this as teams and functions that are working well together. And then sort of those, you know, classic tier 3, as it were. You got threat hunting, proactively looking for the adversaries that slip through, detection engineering, which is a very closely related capability that basically builds clean detections that can then be used, custom detections for your investigation and your triage, and then purple and red teaming exercises as budget, et cetera, allows. So that tends to be there, and of course the managers come in somewhere around the 2 to 3 time frame. And then you may see some additional functions as well, where instead of the SOC managers doing all the incident management coordination, if you get large enough, you may want to have some dedicated folks doing that. Oftentimes the technical coordination gets pulled from the technical folks that have investigation experience, and the business stuff, talking to legal, comms, business leadership, is either on the manager or incident management, and then a dedicated threat intelligence team sometimes comes around that same time. This is not a guaranteed recipe that you absolutely should use and follow. This is generally an observation of what we typically see people invest in. Make sense? So let's take a look at this through 4 different time stages: part-time, small, medium, and large. Very important, not all organizations need or can afford a large team. So don't sweat it if you don't have to get there. It's just to show that journey. And it's critical, 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 regardless of your size, to partner with all the other teams. And I'm just about out of town, so I'm going to go very, very quickly on these. So triage investigation. Sorry, I was calculating towards the end of the hour, so I'm going to go very quickly. You know, kind of a part-time thing, XDR first, even though SIM was the way we used to do it, I would never recommend it today. Getting into, hey, it's a full team with a full-time manager, boom, and add these capabilities. And like I said, these are all in the security adoption framework I mentioned earlier. You got the full-time teams, then you have the inter-team problems, and you need to coordinate between these teams. So very important, you end up having to have more tools, more capabilities, more processes to connect and support them. And then as you go to the global, all of the things that were optional tend to be mandatory. So that's kind of that journey that we see there. So just wrapping it up very quickly here, as we mentioned, minutes matter, people matter, process matters, technology matters, intelligence matters, and teamwork matters. And, you know, buy the book if you like, and check out Mark's list if you want. Thank you.